Instead of always having to type a cell range into formulas, you can use range names, but only if you first name a particular range of cells. This can be helpful if you have a worksheet that contains data of the same type in the same place. For instance, if the cell range of F2 through F10 always contained the totals of the regional sales for your company, you could select that range and then name it regional sales. Then you can move quickly to that named range, or you can use it as a substitute for cell range references in ranged formulas. To name a range, first select the cell range that you want to name. Then click into the name box in the formula bar. Type the name for the range and then press the Enter key on your keyboard to set the range name. Remember that there are no spaces allowed in range names, so use the underscore character instead if needed. Also, range names must be unique within their defined scope, which is typically the whole workbook by default. Once you've created the named range, then anytime in the future when you select that specific cell range, the range name will appear in the name box within the formula bar. Alternately, you can create a named range by first selecting the cell range that you want to name, and then clicking the Define Name button that appears in the Defined Names button group on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. Doing this will open the New Name dialog box where you can define the named range that you selected. You enter the range name into the Name text box. A neat feature of this method is that you can then use the Scope drop-down to select where you want the definition of the named range to function. When you use the name box to create a named range, it defines it with a default workbook scope. You can limit this scope by selecting a single worksheet from this drop-down if desired. You can then enter a comment if desired into the comment text box. Next, assuming that you selected your cell range first, you should see the cell reference shown in the Refers to text box. You can, however, change this reference if needed. Once you have the correct information entered, click the OK button to create the named range. It is also extremely important to note that when you create named ranges, you are making a specific reference to particular cells on a particular sheet. The reference that is created when you make a named range is an absolute reference, meaning that you cannot copy and paste a formula that contains a range name and expect it to adjust to its new location. Instead, the formula will always refer back to its original cells, the ones defined by the range name, no matter where you copy or paste the formula in the workbook. You can use the column and row headings in a table or list within a worksheet to name a range of cells. If you use this method of creating named ranges, then start by selecting the cell range, including any titles that you want to use as the names for the ranges that will be created. Next, click the Create from Selection button in the Define Names button group on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. In the Create Names from Selection dialog box that appears, check the checkboxes that indicate where in your selection the range names are located. Usually this dialog box will not need to be changed as it looks for text values at the perimeter of your selection from which it can create range names. When the correct location of the cells that you want to use for the named ranges is checked in the Create Names from Selection dialog box, finish the process by clicking the OK button to create them. A quick way to select the cells in any named ranges that you have in your workbook is to move to the named range. Once you have named ranges in your workbook, they are contained in the drop-down list that appears when you click the Name Box drop-down within the formula bar. Click the drop-down arrow next to the name box to view the available ranges and select the name of the range that you want to select from the list. The range will appear selected in the worksheet and the name will appear in the name box within the formula bar. You can use named ranges instead of cell range addresses in formulas. One way to do this is to simply type the named range instead of the specific cell range when creating the formulas by hand. Another way to use named ranges in formulas is to begin creating the formula using whichever method that you prefer. When you need to insert a reference to a named range, just click the Use in Formula drop-down button in the Defined Names button group on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. Just select the name of the range that you want to use in the formula to insert it. Then finish your formula as you normally would. You can also change your existing formulas by inserting the named ranges into the formulas that already exist in your worksheet. To do this, first create the named range that is an exact substitute for a pre-existing cell range reference in one of your formulas. Then select the formula cell that contains the cell range reference that you want to replace with a named range. Next, click the Define Name drop-down button in the Define Names button group on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. Select the Apply Names command from that button's drop-down menu of choices to open the Apply Names dialog box. Within this dialog box, click on the name or names of the named ranges shown to substitute the named range that you want. Often, this is already done when you open the Apply Names dialog box. Once you have selected the correct named range to use for the selected substitution, click the OK button to apply them. You can also give names to 3D cell ranges. As we learned in the previous chapter, a 3D cell range is one cell range that spans through multiple worksheets. As long as the cell range reference is the same for all of the different worksheets in the group that you select, you can give it a name. Then it too can be used in your formulas in place of the typical 3D cell range references. To do this, you would want to click the Define Name button that appears in the Define Names button group on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. That will open the New Name dialog box. In the Name text box, enter the name that you want to give to your 3D cell range. Remember that there are no spaces allowed in range names. Ensure that the Scope drop-down is set to Workbook. Next, in the Refers to text box, click the Collapse dialog button at the right end of the text box. Click the Sheet Name tab of the first sheet in the 3D cell range. Hold down the Shift key on your keyboard, and then click the Sheet Name tab of the last worksheet that you want to include in the 3D range. Once the worksheet group has been selected, click and drag over the cells in the worksheet that you want to use as the cell reference for the 3D range. Next, click the Expand dialog button at the right end of the Refers to text box again to expand the dialog box. In the New Name dialog box, click the OK button when you are finished to create the 3D named range. Note that you will not be able to select this range name from the name box. Remember that when you select a range name from the name box, it highlights the cells in the selected range. It would be impossible to show all of the cells from the multiple sheets in a single window, so you cannot access it through the name box. You may, however, use it as a substitute for 3D range references in your 3D formulas. If you no longer require a named range that you have created, you can delete it from the list of named ranges in the workbook. To see the list of named ranges that are available, click the Name Manager button in the Define Names button group on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. Select the named range that you want to delete from the list of named ranges shown in the dialog box. Next, click the Delete button to delete the named range. Click OK in the confirmation message box that appears to finish deleting the selected range name. You can then click the Close button in the Name Manager dialog box.